Strange New Worlds is about to introduce a holodeck? But hold on, this is set before Kirk's time. How can a holodeck exist decades before the next generation introduced the technology? Let's explore the surprising layered history of the holodeck and why Strange New Worlds might not be breaking canon after all. Hey everyone, I'm Nick and welcome back to Sci-Finatics. We've seen in the trailers and some promo photos and everything coming up for the upcoming Season 3 of Star Trek Strange New Worlds starting in a couple of weeks' time that we have a holodeck episode directed by Jonathan Frakes. We get to see our crew of the Enterprise involved in a kind of a old style 1970s traditional Hollywood murder mystery style episode. And we have seen that we've got the typical black and yellow grid as seen in Next Generation, basically confirming that this episode is in fact a holodeck episode. But there's been a little bit of a question about how this can be, because obviously the holodecks weren't officially introduced into Star Trek until Encounter at Farpoint, back in that very first episode of Next Generation in 1987, where we saw a forest sort of setting, we've got people walking on rocks on a river and Data whistling, pop goes the weasel. It was an iconic and memorable scene for the first introduction of the holodeck. But now we seem to have gone back way before not even original series. We're 6-7 years before original series in Strange New Worlds, and the question is, how are we getting holodecks in here in Star Trek? And let's face it, throughout the Rick Berman era of Star Trek, whether that be in Next Generation or DS9 or in Voyager, the holodeck was a staple of storytelling. It became a regular kind of quirky episode, whether that be with recurring characters like Barclay, Moriarty, Vic Fontaine, Sherlock Holmes, Dixon Hill, Parisian pool halls, or Irish villages. The holodeck has generally been used as a source of entertainment, therapy, and also philosophical questions to be asked within the Star Trek universe. The iconic yellow grid introduced back in Next Generation became synonymous with, futuristic simulations and so forth within Star Trek. And even though the holodeck was very first introduced in the Next Generation episode Encounter at Farpoint, there was a bit of a precursor to this. Back in the animated series in 1974, there was an episode called The Practical Joker, which showed what they referred to as a recreation room on the Enterprise, which kind of mimicked a holodeck. It generated trees, forests, snowstorms, environments such as hedge mazes and forest kind of settings, beachside settings and so forth, which, let's face it, is kind of essentially what a holodeck is. And this episode of animated series kind of set up as a bit of a precursor to the first introduction of the holodeck in Next Generation. But it seems like this kind of technology didn't become installed on the Enterprise until at least somewhere in between the end of original series and Star Trek the Motion Picture. Because back in original series, whenever there was recreation to be had, the crew would generally go down to planet surfaces on shore leave and so forth, or hang out in the rec room on board the Enterprise. And something akin to a holodeck was never really seen on original series until we got to that animated series. However, we have seen something that resembles a holodeck going back to Star Trek Enterprise, which is a better part of 100 years prior to Strange New Worlds. Back in the Star Trek Enterprise episode Unexpected in the first season of the show, we visited an alien ship belonging to the Xyrillians. They had a holo-chamber, which was kind of an advanced holographic simulation room, which had sort of detailed immersive environments, including scenery and sort of tactile elements and everything as well. It very closely resembled the holodeck, which was predating Starfleet's first use of the technology. So this kind of implies that holodeck-like technology already existed in the 22nd century, but just not developed by Starfleet and the Federation. So does this mean that possibly Starfleet reverse-engineered this technology that the Xyrillians introduced to Archer and Trip in that episode of Enterprise? It certainly supports the idea that humans did encounter this technology long before Encounter at Farpoint. So does this then raise the question that the holodeck we're going to see in Strange New Worlds may be using very early alien-derived prototypes? I wonder whether there'll be a mention of the Xyrillians, in this episode saying that they've shared the technology with the Federation or something to that effect. So possible explanations of seeing a holodeck in Strange New Worlds obviously go from the fact that it's most likely going to be a prototype, perhaps inspired by Xyrillian or other alien technology that's been shared with the Federation. It could be a classified Starfleet R&D project, not widely adopted or very, very hush-hush, not transmitted to the Federation at wide, but kept very, very quiet as a very new form of technology. Installed for mission-specific use, diplomacy, training, therapy, for example. And it may lack the full capabilities that we've seen back in the next generation era of holodecks. Maybe it's a more simplistic version of the environment. Maybe at this particular point in the technology of the holodeck that we see, we know it's a murder mystery that takes place in a house. Maybe the fact that they're in a house means it needs to be fixed in essentially a house-like environment. They can't be wandering through expansive forests or something like we've seen in Next Generation and so forth. Maybe it's, very simple. It can create 4 walls and a house-type environment, and that's the extent of it. We can't be wandering over mountainous, snowy landscapes just yet. So there will be some sort of limitation in the technology. It's also possible that they don't even call it a holodeck. They could call it a holo-chamber or a recreation chamber or rec room or something like we saw in an animated series, just to kind of set it apart from the holodeck first introduced in Next Generation's Encounter at Farpoint, just so that it kind of makes it a little bit less of a canon break. It's also possible that the producers and writers of Strange New Worlds are kind of wanting to tell different stories like we did in the other incarnations of Star Trek. And let's face it, holodeck stories became a staple of all of the Rick Berman era Star Trek. So the fact that Star Trek Strange New Worlds wants to take a modern approach to 23rd century technology. The writers want to tell stories with flexibility, genre, different visuals and a different tone, which, allows more episodes to be done in the holodeck to allow sort of fantasy episodes, musicals, comedies and all this sort of stuff. I mean, we've had the Elysian Kingdom episode in the first season. We've had the musical episode in the second season. Technically speaking, these sort of episodes in the past would have been holodeck episodes. So I guess by introducing holodecks, you can have a little bit more free reign to tell these kinds of stories within the Star Trek universe. And it probably does it in a way that's a little bit less disrupting on the show's, world. And let's face it, like many Star Trek shows of recent years, Strange New Worlds is kind of loosening up the visual continuity of the era. Obviously trying to respect canon where it can as well. We've, for example, had a complete redesign of the Enterprise under Pike, which looks obviously completely different to how it looked in the 60s, but keeping certain visual aspects similar so that you can still see the original designs and stylings and everything like that in the show, and keeping that element consistent, but updating the visual style of the series for a modern audience. Star Trek of recent years hasn't necessarily been shy about mucking around with a bit of continuity. Whether this is a retcon or whether it's a reinterpretation of the history of the holodeck remains to be seen, because let's face it, in recent Star Trek we've had things like Klingon forehead changes and Discovery's spore drive, Spock having a sister in the form of Michael Burnham. These have all been reasonably large changes to canon that they've got into Star Trek, much to the sort of chagrin, of some Star Trek fans. I always think it's very possible to have plausible explanations as to why you're changing things. It just doesn't have to break canon too much. I think there's always ways to explain it that make sense to the long-term Star Trek fans who know all of the history. Canon is kind of a living thing in Star Trek, and sometimes things need to be reimagined for a new generation or a new audience coming into the show. But I think Strange New Worlds could easily include an in-universe line explaining the experimental nature of the technology so that we don't break apart from the established canon too much. Is Star Trek Strange New Worlds innovating within canon, or are they rewriting it? Does the holodeck fit into this era of Star Trek, or does it kind of feel a little bit anachronistic? I think if they explain it in a plausible way, maybe make a link back to the Xyrillians, make it very hush-hush, so that it's, a very sort of secret project that the Enterprise crew is involved with. It's not broadcast to the Federation, it's kept very, very quiet, it's on a starbase, very hidden, very first prototype, then I think you could kind of get away with it. I also think there needs to be some kind of mention regarding the power requirements and physical capabilities of the holodeck in this time, maybe likening it to to how computers were back in the 1960s, gigantic things that were refrigerator sized that took over an entire room, versus today where we can essentially hold a computer in our hand the size of a mobile phone. Therefore, some sort of reference to saying the power requirements being so enormous, they have to have a holodeck on a planet's surface or a starbase in order to operate it, because its requirements and power drain and so forth is so huge that it's not quite ready for implementation on board starships just yet, and it takes until next generation before that actually happens. But what do you guys think? Do you think it's too soon to have holodecks in Star Trek? Or do you think it's completely plausible that this was in fact the very, very first prototype that they're exploring in this episode, and that it can fit in there amongst the established Star Trek canon? Leave your thoughts in the comments section and we'll get chatting about it. Thanks for joining this look at the Holodeck Paradox in Strange New Worlds. If you're enjoying Star Trek lore breakdowns that we do on this channel, deep dives and other Star Trek continuity mysteries and everything, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Be sure to check out my merch in the merch shop. Plenty of cool Star Trek themed t-shirts and mugs and hoodies and caps and everything there for you to pick up. Always at very good prices, which go a long way to helping support the channel. So I appreciate your support from that. I'll be back soon with the next video. Catch you guys soon.